Do you remember your very first time playing a video game? Maybe it was on a PS2, a Nintendo DS, or in my case, the Wii. No matter what you were gaming on back then, nobody cared about FPS, input delay, or specs. We just pressed start and had pure uncomplicated fun. But gaming doesn't feel that way anymore. It's been almost 5 years since the last big console release, and a lot of us have since switched to PC. Now you would think that's a good thing with better graphics, more control, and being able to do more than just playing games. But that last part is actually a huge problem. Unlike consoles, gaming PCs aren't for the people anymore. AI companies are buying up GPUs for machine learning, scalpers are instantly grabbing the few that are left, and prices just keep climbing. At this point, the idea of a budget gaming PC barely even exists when the cheapest graphics cards start at $300. So trying to buy a whole computer that can run modern games with only $99 sounds almost impossible. And as if that wasn't already hard enough, I got scammed along the way, but somehow I still managed to pull it off with some change left to spare. You've probably seen other YouTubers attempt similar challenges, but if you watch closely, you'll notice that many of them get extremely lucky deals on local marketplaces and still end up going slightly over budget. Even in Zach's TechTurfs video, which has the craziest specs out of any $100 PC I've ever seen, he mentioned that one of his Discord members found the deal for him, and he admitted that the only real hard part to replicate was finding an OEM desktop at such an unbelievable price.
The hardest part would just be finding an OEM for this good of a price.
Now to be fair, it's hard to blame them for going a tiny bit over. At this price point, even a few extra dollars can significantly boost performance and value, and if you're not taking on a challenge, you should absolutely increase your budget to take advantage of the amazing $50 GPU market. But for today's challenge, we are giving ourselves a strict $99 limit, and I am only allowed to shop on eBay, so no $30 pre-built gaming PCs. Why exactly $99? I'd prefer not to answer that one. Just like with any challenge, we need to set some goals first. For this budget, we're aiming for at least 60 FPS in competitive titles like Fortnite, Rocket League, and CS2, and at least 30 FPS in single-player games like the Tomb Raider Reboot Trilogy. These are the standards that my $600 laptop that I still regret buying to this day was barely able to meet, so if we can achieve all these goals today, I'm gonna be pretty happy. But let me just say, things were not off to a good start. All I could find were overpriced trash cans with a 4th Gen i7 and a GT 630 inside, not even close to what I need for my objectives. After scrolling through tons of listings, I decided that I was gonna budget about $69 for the office PC and the remaining $30 would go to the GPU. If we can even find something for that price that isn't a GT 710. Now I know, $70 is a lot, especially compared to the $30 to $50 that everyone else is spending on their computers. Although it looked like we were finding some great deals, every single time I thought I was about to score a steal, there was always a catch. Either it had less than 16 gigabytes of RAM, which we need in order to not stutter in Fortnite, an old ass CPU that will be terrible for CPU intensive games, or a shipping cost twice the price of the whole PC, and sometimes all of the above. The worst part is that I won't even be saving enough money to justify buying my own RAM or SSD, because those are gonna cost me at least $10 each, and for only a $5 discount, I definitely want the RAM and SSD with my PC. However, I was lucky to find a listing with a 6th Gen i5 processor, 16 gigs of DDR4, a 256 gig SSD, and an R5 340X OEM graphics card. The only problem is that we only have $24 left. So we're definitely not going to hit the FPS numbers you would get if you paired this with a RTX 2060 Super, as that one card costs more than my entire budget. If you've ever been unemployed and poor like I was a few years ago, you would know that the $25 range is dangerously close to the GT 710 and GT 630 territory. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me just tell you, this price range is full of genuine landfill garbage. You might as well play on integrated graphics. Fortunately for us, this price point isn't entirely filled with junk and actually has a few hidden gems. You just need to know what to look for. Looking at the average GPU prices, we've got a few solid options. The NVIDIA GTX 650, 650 Ti, 660, 760, and maybe an AMD RX 550 if I can find one cheap enough. But just as I was about to buy this GTX 660, I noticed a huge issue. Do you see it? Yeah, the power connector. I don't have the budget to grab a SATA to 6-pin or 8-pin adapter, so that pretty much rules out most of these cheap gaming GPUs. That means we have to rely on workstation GPUs, as they are usually super efficient and don't need power connectors, like the RTX 4000 Ada SFF. That card performs like an RTX 4070 while drawing less than 70 watts for $2,000. Yeah, not exactly budget friendly. Workstation GPUs are almost always overpriced for gaming because, well, They're designed specifically for professional tasks. So that left me with just 3 options: the FirePro W4100, W5100, and E9173. And out of those 3 options, the only one I could actually afford was the W4100. It has just 2 GB of VRAM, which isn't ideal, but at this price point, we don't really have a choice. Nowadays, a lot of people say that the standard for GPUs is now 8 GB of VRAM, but unfortunately, we're gonna have to settle for a quarter of that and hope we can still somewhat play modern games. Now is also a good time to talk about what actually counts as a modern game. The definition isn't 100% clear-cut, but I'd say most people consider the modern gaming era to have started with the PS1 in 1994 or the PS2 in 2000. But for this video, I'm considering any 3D game released in the 2010s or later, because this PC will most likely shred through anything released in the 2000s. Even my dad's first computer from 2003 can run Tomb Raider Legend, so I won't bother with those older modern games. With the computer and GPU finally in hand after a couple of weeks, it was time for the moment of truth. Will it turn on, and did I get scammed? You might be wondering why I'm acting so paranoid here, but this is because I actually received the PC over a month ago and haven't bothered to open up the box until now. And if you've ever bought anything on eBay, you know that the return window is typically 30 days. And because it is now February 5th, if this computer doesn't boot up, I am screwed. And for the GPU, it's been sitting around for over a month as well, and you might even recognize it from a previous video on the channel. But since there's a much higher chance of something going wrong with the desktop, we're gonna test it first, along with the R5 340X that came with it, to make sure everything actually works. So I unplugged my DisplayPort cable from my main PC and plugged my monitor into the R5 340X that came with this system. When I turned on the PC for the first time, it restarted itself a few times, and this was when I noticed that my keyboard was not connecting. One of the front USB ports was broken. It's not a big deal, as I did expect some small issues as I bought this PC from eBay, so this was really not bad at all. What I was worried about was running into more problems, because if we already found a small issue before even logging onto the Optiplex, who knows what else could go wrong. Despite the scare, setting up Windows was smooth, and now all I gotta do is make sure I did get what I paid for. Now here's the thing, you already know I got scammed, but at this point in time, I still didn't figure out what went wrong yet. Somewhere in this PC, there's something off, so see if you can figure it out before I did. At first, the GPU wasn't showing up in Task Manager like I expected it to, and I thought it was because the drivers weren't installed, but it randomly appeared out of nowhere a few minutes later, so that is good. The CPU and RAM speeds looked fine too, so everything seemed okay. For now. Next, I prepared my PC for benchmarking by downloading the games I planned to test, but Epic Games was not having it today. This was the exact same thing that happened to my library PC when I tried to install Epic Games in that video, but this time I managed to fix it pretty quickly by simply downloading it from the Microsoft Store instead. It's 12:02 AM though, so I'm gonna leave the rest of this challenge for tomorrow. The next morning, I finished setting everything up, swapping the R5 340X for the FirePro W4100 and installing all the necessary drivers. And after an entire day of using the PC, you'd think I would have caught the scam by now. So if I really did get scammed, how did I fully test the PC without noticing? As it turns out, the scam wasn't with the desktop, it was the GPU that came with it. This was not an R5 340X like I thought it was. It was actually an R5 340 OEM. One of the weirdest graphics cards in the world. It is so obscure that searching it up on YouTube brings up 0 results. But somehow this scam actually helped with the challenge. Luckily, even though I was past the 30-day return window, I still managed to get a solid refund for the mistake. A GPU I wouldn't have even thought of using ended up shaving a few dollars off the total cost of the build. With everything set up, it's finally time to put this $99 PC to the test. We're testing everything from lightweight esports titles to some of the most demanding AAA games. Let's start with Rocket League, since it's the least demanding game out of everything I'll be testing today. I started with 1080p lowest settings and was greatly surprised that we are getting 80 FPS instead of the 60 FPS I expected. It wasn't until I put the settings to the quality preset that it would drop down below 60 FPS. Definitely playable for just $99 and better performance than my scam of a $600 laptop. Next up is Fortnite. This can be a super demanding game. As you can see, I'm only getting 7 FPS in the lobby with the medium preset, but if we put it on competitive settings, it ends up performing very well. Now you might think that 80 FPS at 1080p on an FPS test map is not very impressive, and I would have to agree. To fix this problem, I simply decreased the 3D resolution down to 50%, and here I was getting over 200 FPS consistently, and over 140 FPS while free building. It might look like a crazy jump just from decreasing our 3D resolution, because if you do it on any semi-capable PC, you won't really notice a difference at all. But this 2 to 3 times boost comes from the fact that we only spent $20 on the GPU, meaning that our i5 6500 is being heavily bottlenecked. and by decreasing our 3D resolution, that makes the game a lot less GPU intensive. It does get significantly harder to see anything as we drop our 3D res, but I wanted to show you my results on 25% just to show you how bad the W4100 is compared to the i5-6500. And this GPU bottleneck becomes even more obvious in AAA GPU intensive titles, where the CPU is barely breaking a sweat. So let's switch things up and test our first AAA game, Tomb Raider 2013. 1080p low settings does pretty well at 50 FPS, which I wouldn't consider playable in 2025, but you gotta remember at this price point you can't expect too much. 1080p high on the other hand takes it down to a cinematic viewing experience at around 24 FPS. If you play on easy mode it might be playable, but you have to be a 24 FPS veteran and be really good at shooting if you want to be able to complete this game in hard mode with these settings. All things considered, if you had this setup you're likely going to be playing on 900p low settings or 720p high settings. You could definitely beat Tomb Raider on this eBay gaming PC. Before we get into the rest of the single player games, we're going to be testing the most popular competitive game right now, CS2. At 720p, we're still being bottlenecked by the GPU, but still getting between 50 and 60 FPS. 900p holds up decently at around 50 FPS, while 1080p occasionally dips to 36. I can't say exactly how playable it is since I'm in unranked lobbies and playing from a weird angle, but for a $70 build, you could get some casual gaming in here with no problem. Continuing on with some more AAA titles, Rise of the Tomb Raider looks like it's doing pretty decent, and then the second we look at the mountain, it's more like Decline of the Tomb Raider. We still finished with 39 FPS, so I will take that. The last and most demanding game we're going to test is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. In this game, it makes it very obvious that we are GPU bottlenecked because it says at the bottom right that we are 0% GPU bound when normally it should say 98 or 99. I'm pretty satisfied with how this build turned out, but if you don't think it was surprisingly fast for a $73 PC, I understand. I'll see what I can do with a higher budget in a future video. Anyways, if you want to see me turn a $0 library computer into a beast gaming PC, watch this video next.